Zeidon Alkinani is a Middle East politics lecturer at Georgetown University here in Qatar. Very good to have you with us. I know that you've been with us over the last couple of hours watching what's been going on. I want to ask you about the timing of Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian's statement on X, the criteria that he laid down leading to a possible ceasefire. He says it should be recognition of Iran's legitimate rights, payment of reparations, and firm international guarantees against any future aggression. Now, these are statements, of course, that we've heard from the Iranian government since the start of this war, and indeed prior to that. Nevertheless, it comes at a time when the Revolutionary Guard says, no, we're digging in for the long haul. This is going to be a long fight, and we're ready for it. What do you make of the fact that the timing of this statement coming out?
Well, the timing indicates that Iran, as a regime, is certainly pressured politically, militarily, and economically, and that was certainly expected. But then we notice the variety and the differences in the statements or the approaches between the Iranian president and the forces related to the IRGC. And these differences and divisions and the multilateral approaches towards Iranian foreign policy always existed, even prior to this war. But we may notice it now more than ever, given the fact that the IRGC believes that it has the right to take the front seat in leading this regional war, which is why a lot of the statements and the positions are contradicting with the official ones from Pezeshkian as the Iranian president. We even noticed that a few days ago when he apologized for some of the attacks against neighboring countries, which we assumed or believed to be in relation to the Gulf states, who played a vital role in advocating to the US in preventing this war to happen from the first place. But within a few hours, we witnessed some of the attacks happening against those very same neighboring countries. Mujtaba Khamenei, the new supreme leader himself, is believed to be a nomination that was pushed forward by the IRGC, which means that the Iranian regime we're dealing with is very different from the Iranian regime prior to the assassination of the former supreme leader. It's much more militarized, hence, which is why we're witnessing some of these actions taking place regionally.
Yes, I understand that Mujtaba Khamenei was actually part of the IRGC 1.2 when he was growing up. Perhaps that, to some extent, explains that link. But does that lead on to a question about is there a disconnect between what the goals of the IRGC and the goals of the leadership? And in the event that there are efforts to try to reach some sort of de-escalation, could you see some sort of confusion as a result of that one may get in the way of the other?
I don't think there's a confusion from their side. There might be a confusion from our side, trying to understand why there isn't a unified approach from the Iranian perspective. But within Iran, there is a very clear distinction in the approaches. The IRGC believes that it's facing an existential crisis, means you will have to hit back in an existential way, whether that's towards the US and Israel, but also the neighboring countries, such as the Gulf states, who played a vital role, as we previously mentioned, in being economic and political allies and trying to build strong reconciliation with the Iranian regime. Whereas some of the reformist camp representatives, such as Pezeshkian, believes that it would only make sense economically to get back the Americans and other international regional actors on the negotiation table.
We've obviously seen an increase in the number of attacks that have been taking place against tankers, fuel tankers particularly, in the Strait of Hormuz. Also suggestions that the IRGC is tightening its grip on the Strait of Hormuz with the resulting impact globally that we've seen. We've seen EU countries, ministers meeting in Brussels, trying to find a way of getting themselves more oil in the face of this crisis. Is this, do you think, part of the wider conflict that Iran is pushing forward in terms of as well as the missile attacks, the drone attacks that we've seen? Or is this actually a switch in focus? Is Iran now getting to the point where it sees...
Much more the latter, although either or are very connected. They're trying to ensure that showing the world that a war against Iran would cost economically to the rest of the world and not just be limited to the region or Iran as a regime in itself, which is why we're noticing some of the tactics where they're even, as an Iranian regime, when they're blocking business around the Strait of Hormuz, they're equally harming their own economy, but they're also harming the rest of the world. They know the indication and the pressures and the consequences this may lead regionally and internationally. Even the cost of the war in itself, beyond the energy and oil prices, we know every 90 seconds the war is costing the United States $1 million US. That's every 90 seconds. And that's not even the US conducting or implementing or executing most of its military capabilities. capabilities. There's a lot of question in Europe where oil prices and gas bills might reach a level which were much more significant than the COVID or the post-COVID period, particularly in countries such as the United Kingdom, Spain and France. Trump is also facing a very strong domestic pressure, where as he's getting closer to the midterm elections, he might be facing an internal and intra-Republican crisis, where a lot of the Republican congressional members would be facing economic crises where they wouldn't be able to meet the prices of the living standards or the fuel and oil and gas bills. It's an economic war, simultaneously to it being a political war. It's also an attempt to try to drag everyone into the picture and ensure to push everyone to put enough commitment and effort into stopping this war, regardless of their opinion, regardless of their belief, if Iran can be a vital and reliable neighbor in the future.
It's a very complex situation, but I appreciate you taking the time to unpack that for us.
Discuss this and all the latest developments in this war. We're now joined by Zeidon Alkinani, a Middle East politics lecturer at Georgetown University here in Qatar. Zeidon, good to have you with us on Al Jazeera as always. I want to pick up with what the Qatari Prime Minister was saying there. Gulf countries clearly in a very delicate position right now, a very tightrope that they're walking, having to maintain diplomacy because Iran is, in their geography, it's a neighbor, but also having to defend their sovereignty. How long do you think they can sustain and they keep this neutral position they have right now?
As much as they can. They, even prior to the war, initiated and tried to advocate to the US to prevent such a war from happening, given that the rumors were always there on the table. A lot of media assumptions predicted that such a thing would happen, but not maybe to the extent that Trump actually did coordinate it with Israel, or not even to the extent of assassinating Khamenei, which is why a lot of the predictions and a lot of the attempts in preventing such a war is finding itself in a very delicate position, but also in a cornered position where it's no longer we're no longer in a position of what can we do, but rather wait to see until how much this war will cost both sides and end it eventually.
There are reports suggesting that some Gulf leaders believe that Washington dragged the region into this conflict without a clear plan. Do you think the trust in US security guarantees is being eroded now, is eroded as a result of this conflict?
Enormously decreased. There is a very strong belief and an assumption that after this war, the relations between the Gulf and the US will witness a major transformation. It's not clear if there will be a requirement of more guarantees or revisiting the nature of the relationship in the future.
Do you think there'll be a rethink about the costs and benefits of hosting military bases in this region, US military bases?
It'll be difficult to know at this stage. One cannot forget that as much as Trump or Trump's administration presented a heads up to the Gulf states about such a war coming, the Gulf states is also now witnessing a stronger threat that they perhaps didn't expect it to be a threat to that extent, which is Iran in today's case. So we'll have to wait and see until the war is over.
Right. And what about with Iran? Will geography ultimately force the Gulf countries to maintain relations with Iran regardless of the current tensions?
Of course, in the long term, they'll always have to accept the fact that their neighbors, both Iran, have to accept that the Gulf states will always be around the corner and vice versa. In Iran's case, it also matters on if that same regime will stay in the picture or another regime comes, and that will obviously present a major transformation in the way the Gulf states will deal with Iran in the future. But certainly in the first short period, in the short term, right after this war, once it is over, we'll definitely expect a massive decrease in the trust and then a strong impact on the reconciliation efforts that were built upon for the past few years between the Gulf and Iran.
Right, and all eyes, of course, right now on the internal dynamics in Iran, within the country, what's happening right now. We've heard President Pezeshkian lay out some conditions for peace, but at the same time, the Revolutionary Guard are continuing, their attacks across the region. What do you think is happening internally, and what will determine the course, the direction of the war? What factors internally will determine the way the war goes?
Well, the differences are very evident within the intra-elitist differences in Iran, speaking politically, militarily, even religiously, if we were to look at the role of the Hawza and Najaf or Qum towards the rulings of Tehran. They've always existed, those variety between those different power structures and agencies. Khamenei was the ultimate force that gathered all of these different opinions in ensuring that there would be a unified foreign policy, a unified approach. But today we're witnessing that the IRGC has militarized the political system in Iran, which is why we're witnessing conflicting and contradicting opinions and approaches between the Iranian president and the IRGC.
We are expecting to hear from the new supreme leader sometimes today, we understand. How significant would it be if we heard from him today? And what are you expecting to hear from this new supreme leader?
There are a variety of things that we were expecting here. Mujtaba Khamenei will have to present himself as a future leader to Iran, and not just the new leader who will be leading this existential war to protect the Islamic Republic of Iran. We're also expecting to see what is the real intentions of the Iranian regime towards this war, given that, as we previously discussed, we're noticing a huge distinction between the stance of the Iranian president and the stance of the IRGC. As previously discussed in other programs, Mujtaba Khamenei is believed to be the nomination of the IRGC against the Hawza of Qom, which means that the political system in Iran post-Khamenei is much more IRGC-oriented than it used to be.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what we hear from the new supreme leader. Zeidon, thank you so much, as always, for joining us on Al Jazeera. Zeidon Alkinani from Georgetown University here in Qatar.